two things first, legal things. These are my opinions only. They do not represent the thoughts of 3M as a whole. And second is I can't answer any questions about 3M financials. So those are the only two things I was told that I had to say. So good afternoon. Happy to be here. This is usually better if it's a conversation. So if you have any questions in what I'm saying, just raise your hand. I'm happy to have more of a conversation than it is just me up here speaking. But I can tell you about my last 3 years living in China, the difficulties of doing business. I can answer questions about what you guys think is going to happen with the trade war. I've got a lot of opinions on that. I was part of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, so I have some information from them as well that I'm happy to share with you guys. So we can just start talking. I normally don't speak from a piece of paper, but I had some information I thought you guys would like to know. The first question everybody asked me is, what was the big thing they had to get used to living in China? Was it the language? Was it this? Was it that? Nope. It was the people, the sheer number of people. So just to give you guys some information, Shanghai, the city I lived in, just the city, has 26 million people in it. That's 3 times the size of New York City, or 5 times the state of Minnesota. So for every person here, there's 5 living in just this city. The area covered by Shanghai is 3% of Minnesota's state. So 5 times the population living in 3% of the area. So lots of people, and that's, what's that?
They build high?
They build high and they build often, yes. That is one of the things, so my parents came out and saw me. My parents are 73, and that was the thing they were shocked by. When you fly into Pudong, which is the new big airport out to the west of the city, you drive by just stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of towers. So imagine the largest apartment building you've ever seen. I'm talking 90, 100, 120 stories. There'll be 15 of them in a cluster. You go another 2 miles, now there's 30. On the other side of the road, there'll be 40. So there's just these massive clusters of people. Because you got to remember, even in that 3% that Shanghai covers, there's a tremendous amount of industrial space. So that amount of space where people can live gets even smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's the big deal. And when you talk about China, the other thing to remember is we always talk about a billion, a billion, a billion, a billion. The number is actually 1.4 billion. So what that means is they are more than a billion more than we are in total. So it's no longer they're a billion more than the entire population of the United States. So the things they can do is amazing. Right? The other thing to keep in mind is it is a communist regime. Right? It is controlled by the party, and the party is the be-all and end-all. That's really, really good in some places. It's a little bit scary to us. But I will tell you, and we'll get more into this, the average citizen doesn't view that as scary at all. So 90% of the population has been raised in that system since the day they were born. They don't know any different, and here's the thing they like about it. Their life keeps getting better every year. Right? So we talk about the growth of the middle class in China. It's exponential. Now, it's not our middle class by any means. We talk about the middle class in China would not really even register on our scale, but their lives are getting exponentially better. Their lives are better than their parents' lives are better than their grandparents, and it's looking better for their kids every day. Right? So even when we talk about the slowdown in China, we're talking about 5.6% IPI. We haven't touched that number in 2 decades in the United States. Right? So that's kind of the things that we're talking about there. Talking about the cost of labor. So people keep wondering what's going on with the cost of labor, and I'm sure my friend here knows about that. The cost of labor is skyrocketing in China. We're talking double-digit growth guaranteed every year. We're talking sometimes up to 60 and 75% growth in a 3-year span. So that sounds good for us, right? Maybe we can reshore some of the manufacturing. No. So even at that rate, they're still at 25% of what our cost of labor is. So they've got miles to go before we can actually start competing at a cost level with China again. China's not fearful of the US reshoring manufacturing. What they're fearful of losing it to a lower cost provider like a Vietnam, a Laos, a Malaysia, or an India. Right? India is making a big play for the technology push that China has today. So you talk about Foxconn, you talk about Samsung, you talk about those type of people. China, the only thing that's making China nervous is Samsung just opened a state-of-the-art facility in Vietnam. It's the largest electronics manufacturing facility in the world, and they chose to put it in Vietnam for a reason. Right? They don't want to deal with China anymore. Foxconn just opened an Apple production facility in India. Now they say that's to service the India market, right? It's very difficult. There's even more complex tax codes getting in and out of India. So they said they put it there to make that. However, it's actually a state-of-the-art facility. So it can do things that the China facilities they have can't do. Could they upgrade those facilities? Absolutely. but maybe they don't need to, especially with the downturn in mobile electronics. And then the trade war. So it's important to think about the trade war, about the people. Two things are really going to change that trade war capability for us. And again, these are my opinions, but it's based on what I saw in China. One is they don't think in a 4-year cycle like we do. Right? So we think in a 4-year cycle because why? Because there's elections. Everybody's got to change something, make their job stable, things of that nature. The party's been in plan for 100 years, and they have 100-year plans. They refresh that plan every 10 years. They have a president for life. Right? So he's not fearful of a change in the tenor of the people. He's not fearful of the U.S. trying to actually try to impede in their growth. The only thing that's ever going to scare the Chinese government is if we decide that we'll pay more for things like this. And it's not going to happen. Right? If we decided as a group, as a society, hey, you know what, I'm willing to pay $2,000 for this phone as long as it's manufactured in Wisconsin. That's the only thing that'll drive fear into the hearts of the Chinese government. And it's never going to happen. If anything, they're going to lose business, like I said, to Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, those type of places. Because we're just too good at it, right? We build the technology, but we're not great at producing it at a low cost. There's always a low-cost provider out there somewhere. So then the other thing you have to think about is the culture. The culture, the basis of the trade war that we're having now, yes, it's about the trade imbalance, but that's not the biggest thing because we're always going to choose a low-cost provider. It's the IP. We talked about this earlier today. The culture of China views IP completely differently than we do. We view that as something I won. I won it, I was first, I own it, I get it for a certain period of time, and I'm protected, you can't have it. If you want to get it, you got to come to me and you buy it from me. That's not the way it works in China. China's a sharing community. If I know how to make something better, why wouldn't I teach everyone? Because it's not China against China, it's China against everybody else. Always has been that way. Okay? A good example of that is Suzhou. So Suzhou is a town, kind of a sleepaway suburb of Shanghai. It's about a 45-minute high-speed rail line ride. So I'm there on my 3rd week landing in China, and we're going through this massive industrial complex. But every one of these massive buildings has this at least 60-story tower. It's not wide. It's got no windows. It can't be someplace you live in. It looks like a really wide smokestack. So as I'm driving through, I asked the rep that I'm riding with, hey, why does everybody have these massive towers? These are all elevator manufacturers. And I looked around and I said, well, I can see 12 of these towers. Is it one manufacturer that's got facilities that big? No, 12 different manufacturers. Well, why are they all together? Well, because they get a tax break if they're here. So the governments, the municipalities, set up tax breaks to put industries together, right? You go to Shenzhen a lot. What's in Shenzhen? Anything that's coming to the United States and anything that's electronics. Why? Because there's a tax-free zone set up there. You go to Suzhou, you'll see elevator manufacturers, escalators, elevators, they're all together. And what that does is that takes IP down even a further level because if you're right next door, I'm either going to see it, I'm going to find out about it, or we're going to talk about it. So that's going to be the problem with our trade war if we're really pinning it to our hopes on getting a lockdown, ironclad IP contract. It's just not going to happen in China. Questions so far? Go ahead.
Are there other countries that will respect IP?
Yeah, sure.
Would that differ more
Your option is you deal with China or you build up someone else, right? So Korea has decided that Vietnam is the person they're going to build up, right? Korea has really a couple major, Hyundai and Samsung is 80% of the Korean economy. They are bypassing China for the exact reason why we're nervous about going to China. They know if I develop something new like the OLED phone, it's a matter of years or months before that is copied and in place in Chinese manufacturers. So they've decided to try to leapfrog that. They go to another low-cost provider, which is Vietnam, and they got sweetheart deals from Vietnam to make this massive facility. Why? It's great for everybody. Vietnam gets new infrastructure. Vietnam gets really good jobs. They're starting to get technical. And Samsung gets a very, very low cost of labor, probably amazing tax rates, and they get a massive workforce that is there perpetually. And then the other, go ahead.
When you start moving business from China to Vietnam, to Laos, to Thailand, to Cambodia, how soon before those countries are overwhelmed
There's a lot of room to grow there. The issue is they haven't built the infrastructure like China has. A good example is India. India has massive brain power, right? India graduates more PhDs than we have college graduates every year. But they still have a trouble being a world producer. Tax laws are extremely difficult, and moving things around India is extremely difficult. That's the number one thing that they have to get. If we're going to see places like Vietnam or Laos become the next low-cost manufacturing site, they have to get their infrastructure up. I'm talking airports, I'm talking roads, and skilled labor, right? China has 3 decades now, 4 decades of really working with the electronics industry. So they have trainers and people and things that they can do quickly. It's going to take a heavy, heavy investment from manufacturers to bring those other countries up to speed. But you saw Samsung do it. Samsung's doing it, making a commitment. They're putting schools in and things of that nature. And other companies will be the benefit of Samsung doing that.
Did you say it's labor cost in China is 25% of the US?
Yeah. Even after double digits growth for the past decade. Yeah. So they can grow at 75%, I think, every year for the next 3 decades, and they still won't catch up to us. So, and one other thing on that, that's heavily influenced by the coastal regions. So things are getting better in the coastal regions. So if I'm a factory and I have a problem with cost of labor and I'm in Shanghai, I'm very simply going to move 150 miles inland. There's another massive labor source. I got to educate them a little bit better, but I'll pay them about 1/3 of what I'm paying these folks now. So while I say it's growing and it's getting to that 25%, if they wanted it to jump back to 10, they could easily doing that by just moving into the center part of China. Go with you.
What's the difference between doing business like with mainland China versus Taiwan?
Totally different. Yeah. So Taiwan and so mainland China has really good capitalism with a cap on it. Right. So they're very capitalistic. I will tell you, the business people in China are not different than us. They want the same things as us. They want to be successful. They want to be paid more. They want to get promotions. They want to do everything. So everybody in China is just like us. There's just that lingering fear in the background of you can't get too big, right? Because if that capitalism gets out of control, they have an iron fist that can just come down and take whatever you want. A good example would be the new codes they have for environmental. So one of the things that we hear in the US is how bad the air is in Shanghai and Beijing. And it is. It's really, really bad. Just to give you guys a good example, every one of our family members who had a phone, well, that's me and my wife, we have an app on it that tells us the air quality every day. That's the first thing we would look at every morning is what's the air quality. And it gets ridiculous because you get accustomed to it, right? It's the old joke about the frog in the boiling pot of water. You walk outside, you know the air quality is 100, which is really bad. Average air quality in Minnesota is like 7, 14 when it's really bad pollen, right? So you're talking now about 100, right? So that's really bad stuff, but it's a beautiful sunshiny day. You don't know it, so you're just like, do I make the kids wear masks to the soccer game or do we just go? So you end up just going, and that's the thing I'll tell you is that 3M has a massive business in respirators, right? That's what we're trying to do. We can't break into that market because the mindset's not there. Right? They don't think that they need to wear it. And the great example I always give is the Chinese ladies are very worried about having perfect skin. So on a day that's 250 air quality, maybe you'll see 10% of the people wearing some kind of mask. If it's a really sunny day, 90% of the women will have umbrellas, because they care more about their skin than they do about their lungs. So it's a bit difficult to break into that culture when it's been that way.
Does that create health problems over there?
It does, but it's universal health care. So it's one of those things that if you wanted to get that information, you probably couldn't. It's one of those things that it's probably too costly for them to fix rather than address the problems, because again, I'm paying for the factories, I'm also paying for the health care. Remember, the Chinese system over there is 100% employment, 100% employment. So if you want a job, you've got a job. So they need to make sure those factories stay open.
The person on the ground, the real people in the community, what are you aware?
They love us. They like us very much. They think our current president is a bit off. I'll leave that there. And the reason they think that is because they don't understand the problem. They think everything's fine. We're the low-cost provider. We can make things cheaper than you guys. You guys should want to buy from us. they're not getting the level of information. And let me be clear with that. A lot of people think the reason that the Chinese people are comfortable living under the communist regime is because they don't know any better, right? It's like Afghanistan. The only information they get is the Taliban. No, that's not true at all. They know everything. They're perfectly happy where they are. If you look at VPN usage, right, which is a way, so that's the big problem, is that the government does control a lot of things. So VPN, virtual private network, so it makes it look like my internet, my iPad is coming from California and not Shanghai. The number one use is there in China, right? 99% of the people in China have a VPN, just because they know they can get to sites that they wouldn't be able to get to via the normal government channels. So they're extremely well informed. They like us, like I said, they're not very different than us. Most of the people that I met there, heavy consumers, big time consumers. They love to shop, they love to buy. The groups that I would bring back to the US would bring 3 pieces of ratty old luggage. 2 of them would be empty, 1 of them would be full. The first thing they would want to do is go to the Samsonite store. They'd buy all new luggage, and then they'd fill it up. Right? So that's the thing. And I said, well, you can get Samsonite stuff there. Well, it's not real Samsonite stuff. Right? So that's the thing. They're big brand users, so they're very loyal to brand. But they are also very thrifty shoppers as well. So one of the big things that you'll see my company deals with is domestic products versus export products. So export products and domestic products are usually built to 2 different BOMs, so bill of materials, because they know the expectation of quality going to Europe or the United States is here, whereas the quality expectation for China is here. So they build their products a little bit less. That's changing a bit. So the middle class consumer in China is now getting much more aggressive in what they're looking for as far as quality, as far as looks. But the expectation of longevity is not that big. The city turns over quite often. Buildings are turned over. They don't maintain buildings like we do. Typically the answer will be if a building gets too far gone, it just gets torn down and a new one gets put up. They've got endless amounts of labor. So it's not a difficulty for them. That was one of the things that we saw. We first lived in a compound. This is one of the other things I have to reteach my kids, the language to use. Because we lived in these things called compounds, which are little neighborhoods, a lot of houses together. But when you come back here and your daughter says to one of your friends, yes, we're used to living in a compound, you go, hold on. Let me explain what a compound is. But we lived in a very small compound, and the government of Shanghai had just decided this was a redevelopment area. So over the 1.5 years that we lived there, they literally just came through and wiped everything out. So we moved over to the other side of the major highway, and then just buildings started popping up. It's amazing the speed at which the China government can move because, again, they have control over so many things. It's not a choice over whether I'm going to sell my house. It's just a matter of when I'm going to sell my house. Yep. No, very much paid labor. The issue is different rules and different expectations. So one of the things you'll see on construction sites in China is these mobile pods, and those are little trailers. So you have a lot of people, the cities are where people want to be. So if you ask me, and again, my own personal opinion again, one of the problems that China is going to face in the near future is that everyone wants to live in the cities. So if you go to these western lands and you go to the southern lands, you go outside even the tier 2 cities, you'll find ghost towns. Massive towns that are just empty now. And they're filled with people that are 65 years or older. Reason being is because their family was there. All the kids wanted to move to the cities. So now the parents are left there. There's no young kids. Kids aren't moving there, so they have these old towns. So one of the ways that they're doing that is they have a system. You can't just move to a city. If you try to just move to a city, you won't have access to healthcare. You won't have access to schools. So what people do is they move there. They establish a job. They work there for a while, typically just the father. Then they'll petition the government. The government will say, okay, you're a valuable citizen to Shanghai now. Now you can move your family here. One of the things you see on these construction sites are these pods, and somebody will sign up. They'll go into it's too expensive to get a Shanghainese laborer, so you'll go further inland and you'll say, hey, listen, I got a year contract. We'll give you a place to live. We'll give you clothes. We'll give you food, and you're going to work 10, 12 hours a day. And if you can figure out a way to stay, you can stay when we're done. Otherwise, we'll just ship you back, but you got a lot of money going for it.
Does the buildings go up a lot faster?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny because there's kind of a rhythm. It's not always fast, but when it starts, then it's finished very fast. So you'll see buildings that get crushed, and you'll be like, okay, well, there'll be a new building there in 2 months. And it'll sit for 2.5 years. But then all of a sudden on a Thursday they start, and, and it's finished in 3 months. So yeah, it's very fast. Yeah.
What's their transportation like? Lots of high-speed rail or?
If there's one thing that I could take, if there's one thing I could take from China that we desperately need here is their rail system. It is fantastic. It is inexpensive. It is always on time. It goes everywhere you need to go. But here's the difference. Because they own, the government can basically take a mandate and say, well, I need this space for rail lines. So and again, it's not, I don't take your land. I pay you for your land, but there is no negotiation. It's on my timetable. All of their high-speed rails end right at major transportation hubs. So it's not like Amtrak here where you're like, okay, great. I took a train from here to Washington, D.C. Now I got to rent a car to get where I need to go. Nope. They drop the great places, and I'm sure you've been there. Hongqiao is the western suburb of Shanghai. They've got a massive hub now. So they have 2 airports there now, and the high-speed rail train, and it connects to the metro. So I can come from any city in the world into that Hongqiao by any method necessary and go anywhere else in China that I want to go. If I want to stay in Shanghai, I've got the metro that literally takes me anywhere in Shanghai that I want to go, and really, really cheap. If I want to fly in there and I need to go to Beijing, well, I can fly in there and I can jump on the high-speed rail and I can be in Beijing in 6 hours. And I will tell you, if you're going from Shanghai to Beijing, always take the train. Plane is never on time.
Okay, China used to have a two-child policy for family.
One child.
One child.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard now they're worried about not having enough people
Yep.
to replace, but you're talking about billions of people.
Yep.
What's that?
But so 2 things are happening there. So in the 1.4 billion people, they have a larger aging problem than we do. So their demographics are getting out of scope when it comes to age. They've got too many people that are retired and living a lot longer now, and they don't have enough people that are still wage earning to pay for all those taxes and healthcare and things of that nature. So they just relaxed that 1-child policy. You can now have 2 children. You do pay a fee to have the 2nd child, and but my guess is that'll reverse. The issue is they also have seen their population is declining now for the first time in a long time. So I think in a few years you'll see not only the fee for the 2nd child go away, I think you'll start to see bonuses for the 2nd child because they're going to need a lot more people that are younger.
So how is that policed? It's like, whoops, number 2, here's your bill?
Well, again, yeah, it's because universal health care, right? They know everything about you. So there's no way to hide that. You can't have a 2nd child and be like, oh yeah, this is my cousin's kid. They're going to eventually figure that out.
Our government knows everything about us too.
It's true.
Does Amazon exist over there?
Sure. It does.
Same thing?
No. Amazon is just getting a tiny foothold over there. They have Baidu over there, which is the Chinese version of Amazon, and they have Alibaba, Chinese version of Amazon. Amazon will never have a big presence there because it's Alibaba and Baidu are just too locked in already. It's just it's a habit for us, right? We don't say I'm going to search this. We say I'm going to Google this. They don't say I'm going to go buy something. They say I'm going to go to Alibaba.
Communist governments
Yep.
obviously mandated certain age to retire from the same age for
Yep. Yeah, so they do have a retirement age. It's getting stretched further now. So the party hasn't officially announced anything, but the inclination is that they're going to move that a couple years back. It's a bit younger than ours. It's for women, I think it's 52. And for men, I think it's 58 or 60, somewhere in that range. Don't quote me on those numbers, but a little bit younger than us. Yeah, they are moving that back. And again, I don't think they're going to do anything with cutting benefits. They'll try to do something with growth rather than trying to cut benefits. But yeah, like I said, it is 100% employment. Unless there's a reason you can't work, you have to work. And that's easy to see. The good examples are getting on a plane in China at a Chinese local airport. They'll take your ticket at the counter. They'll check your ticket 10 feet away. They'll check your ticket before you start the gangway, and then they'll check your ticket at the plane again. And the reason being is people need jobs, so they create jobs. The other thing too is the street sweepers, right? You'll walk through Shanghai and you'll see people pulling carts with these big brooms, sweeping up. It's a government job, it's good pay, make sure you get your benefits.
So when you say they're retired at 58, let's say, then they don't have to work anymore?
Nope.
And the government takes care of them?
Yep.
They pay their bills, and so they got income coming?
Just like a government pension.
They better increase that quality. You alluded to this earlier, but I'd be interested to know as 3M evaluates where they want to do business in the future, you know, it sounded like earlier you were saying kind of maybe looking outside of China to be as much of a partner. Can you speak to that?
No, yeah, sorry if I gave that impression. We're 100% in on China. It's too big to ignore. If you're a manufacturer of any kind, you have to be in China. Not even for their production outside of the world, but for the future of China, right? The gross domestic consumption there is going to outpace the US in a matter of years, right? We talk about the G20 now, or the G8, which are the 8 largest economies or the 20 largest economies. In the next, you know, and you can talk to McKinsey or any of these strategy firms. Within the next 10 or 15 years, it's going to be the G2. It's going to be us and them, and that's it. Nobody else is going to matter. We're going to have so much of the manufacturing capability and so much of the consumption. You would take all of Europe, and they still probably wouldn't be 6th or 7th on that list. So it's going to be us and China. The G2 is an inevitability. There's nothing we can do. The size of the country, the size of the population, the amount that they produce, the way they can produce it, there's just nothing you can do. You'd be looking for places like India and possibly Malaysia to try to challenge that, but you're talking 50 years before they could even come close to competing, and that's if everything goes well. Yeah. But no, 3M is two things you're doing in China now if you want to have a serious presence. You're manufacturing locally, so 3M has 9 production facilities in China. We manufacture almost as much possible as we can for that product, as well as the surrounding regions. It's just too difficult of a supply chain, which you know about, getting things in and out of China. It's a heavily regulated area, so if you're shipping chemicals and stuff like that, it's very difficult to get it in. So if you're a manufacturer, you're playing in China. It's very simple. You look at all the big autos, either they're there or they're partnering with someone who is there already.
What about all this stolen intellectual properties and that kind of thing? I had a guest speaker, a lawyer from Price and Hughes. Had they raided a warehouse, years ago, they raided a warehouse, had all this stolen stuff, and it all had 3M boxes. I mean, just.
Yep, they're a lot more clever than we are, right? This is the chief of police knows this. Criminals are usually a couple steps ahead because they're constantly reinventing things. We catch them from time to time. We do the best we can, but I'll tell you there's a lot that goes around. In Asia, it becomes even more difficult because it's not just China, right? China is a great big draw magnet for us, but it's also for Korean companies, for Japanese companies, for companies from India. So we see a lot of reboxing of our products. It gets sold for a reason in Korea, and it'll end up in China with a rebox. So it's nearly impossible to tell. One of our big pushes is understanding the supply chain. So we tell most of our customers, just give us the information. Tell us who you buy it from so we can track it back to ourselves. If we can't track it back to ourselves, we're going to tell you. Because that's a warning. Because again, they buy 3M products for what? Quality, right? And so if we say, hey, we don't know if that's ours, why would you take the risk, especially if your name's going on that product?
Consumable goods, America versus China.
Yep.
Goods.
As far as consuming goods or building consumer goods? Yeah. Both of those things, they make most of the consumer goods now. So I don't think as far as consumer goods, I wouldn't know the number on how much we produce, but I'd have to imagine it's heavily, heavily in their favor. All we need to do is look at the trade deficit, right? It's everything we buy. It's, comes with a made in China on it. As far as domestic consumption goes, yeah, they're going to pass this pretty soon. They've had difficulty in the past because your average salary didn't give you much discretionary income. That's changed a lot. I will tell you a couple things that I've been impressed by. The new China automotive capabilities is amazing. I sat in a China-made SUV that was fantastic. Best SUV I've ever seen. And it had more bells and whistles, had everything. Now, you still have the concerns about quality long term, but as far as building a product that looks amazing, China's come a long, long way. It used to be you could tell the things that were made in China versus the things that were made in Europe or something along that. Those lines have completely blurred. They've caught up quickly. And that's the forte of China, right? Is I can take something that you make, I can take it apart, I can make it better, and I can make it a heck of a lot cheaper. And they can do it in a matter of weeks.
Did you or your family have any interactions with security or the police?
Thank God, no. No, the police in Shanghai and the police are very friendly. This is not a lockdown, clampdown state. There's always a police presence, but they're usually just there to help. I would actually say in most of the big cities, you see less police than you do here. That could be because they're sitting behind a camera somewhere, or that could be because I don't know what to look for. But no, they're extremely friendly. I would say China has a real urgent need to make expats like myself feel comfortable, because a lot of their money is based on the fact of I feel comfortable enough to go there, to do business there, whether it's in Shenzhen or Shanghai or Beijing. So they have a vested interest in making sure people like myself are really, really comfortable. I will tell you from having again, little secret, my wife had never been to China before we went to look for a house there. So the first time she landed in China ever, she was going to look for a house the next day. She has never felt more comfortable in a country than she did in China, because you are safe. There's no question. You got to look out for scooters. That's the problem. But as long as you can avoid the traffic and the scooters, you're absolutely, absolutely safe. And the reason there is the criminal code is rough, right? There's no warnings, there's no tickets, there's that kind of stuff. They take things very, very seriously.
So does the government, that type of government, is it like you see in the movie? I mean, are they taking people out and throwing them in jails and that kind of government, or is it a good government for people to live under?
For the most part, it's good. You're never going to see that. It's controlled very, very well. So people ask me, did you see the blackouts? Yes. I would be, in the morning, I'd be getting ready for work. CNN International would be on, and all of a sudden it goes black. And that's because the government's saying, I don't want that. But it's really poorly done. It doesn't start at the right time. So I think it's kind of half-hearted. They don't really care. Plus, like I said, they all have access to the internet, so they all have this information. What we hear about here in the United States about people going to concentration camps, that has less to do with your everyday Chinese than it does with some of the disputed areas. We talked about this table over here. There's some conflict in some of the outlying areas. So if you talk about the Ulamuchi, which is out in the western part, kind of near Mongolia, that's where it kind of starts to border the Middle East. So you've got a group of people over there, and you can read about this, I won't tell you about it, but Uyghurs. So it's a Uyghur population that is a Muslim-based population that is inside China that doesn't want to be China. So there's some difficulties there. We all know about Tibet. We all know what's going on there. So yeah, they're going to try to control what they think is Chinese. Do they do it in the manner that we would approve of? No. Does the average China citizen give that a second thought? No.
Is 3M considered a big player over there?
No. Yes and no, because we're not that big of an employer. So if you're talking big player, you're looking at the Foxcons of the world, who makes all your phones and stuff like that. And then big auto would be next, because yes, we have manufacturing facilities, but ours are pretty automated. So we don't have we don't have a ton of employees versus an automobile plant or a Foxconn plant where you have.
Does 3M feel very welcome there?
Absolutely, absolutely.
They want them
Yep. And we've got a long history. If you go to the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, their very first picture on their timeline is the opening of 3M's office. We were the very first U.S. company to open up a facility in Shanghai in 1979, literally the first. So we've been there longer than anybody else. There were other people down in Shenzhen in the free trade zone, but this was the first time that was not in a free trade zone in China. So 3M's been there forever. We have a great relationship, very strong growth there. Like our CEO said, if you listen to the earnings calls, 3M tends to lead into the dips in IPI or in GDP, and then we lead out again. So we saw a bit of a dip in China, and by dip I mean just a slowdown. We're still growing, it's just we're not growing as much as we wanted to grow, and we'll probably lead back out of that too as that economy tends to recover.
There's one more question.
Sure.
Yep. How do you think this is going to shake out in Hong Kong?
And it's the same thing in Taiwan, so I'll talk about those both together. You've got Taiwan and Hong Kong are used to living under a more democratic regime. They see the monster coming towards them as far as something completely different. By monster, I just mean it's really different than what they're used to. They're going to put up a good fight. China's in no hurry. China's not going to go in with an army and crush those type of things. They're just going to slowly bleed it down. And they're very, very shrewd, and they're very, very smart. You see some of the things, and you guys might not pay attention, but One of the things that China just released is no more single travelers to Taiwan unless you have a business license. So they used to do this thing where they were telling people from Beijing, hey, please go visit Taiwan. They just shut that down. And what they're trying to do is put a little bit of an economic squeeze on Taiwan to kind of bring them back into the fold. Hong Kong is one thing. Taiwan is absolutely mandatory because of its location militarily, right? So when you talk about the South China Sea, they don't want the U.S. there. They don't want anybody else there. They want control of that. One of the interesting things, you get a list of things that you can and cannot bring to China when you move to China. One of them is maps. You can't bring any map. The reason being is because my map that I purchased here will have a different line around China than the China map will. Their map goes way down and includes most of the China Sea. Right, we still debate that. So, thank you very much.